Today we're talking about a place that might be unfamiliar to a lot of people. Walker Ridge sits in a remote part of Northern California at the junction of Lake and Colusa counties. And right now, CNPS and a number of other organizations and individuals have launched a campaign to protect it. We want to see it permanently protected as an area of critical environmental concern. And that's for a large number of reasons, some of which we're going to be getting into today. But today what we really wanted to do was share with you the story of Walker Ridge, and we're going to do that in a different sort of way, as you've probably gathered based on how we've teased this webinar today. So I'm joined here by my colleague, David Bryant. And David, would you tell us a little bit about how we're going to be approaching the conversation here today?
Absolutely, yes. So this is going to be a fantastic webinar because I always put forward that plants and places are speaking in a really unique and beautiful language. And we can use a lot of different tools and methodologies to decipher that language. So whether that is data mapping or painting or photography or scientific observation, these are all different ways that we as human beings can try to understand what's going on in the environment around us. And so I'm so excited today to hear about the approaches from an artist and a botanist as they approach Walker Ridge.
So great. So today, we're really excited about our guests. I celebrated artist and naturalist Obi Kaufmann and conservation scientist and botanist Nick Jensen, who's our lead conservation scientist here at CNPS. And we're going to be talking about the ways in which they're interpreting the messages and experiences of the natural world, and that of Walker Ridge in particular. And before I get started, I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. First of all, congratulations to Obi. He just learned today that his new book, Forests of California, debuted as #6 on San Francisco Chronicle's list. So it's wonderful to hear so many people here in California and these audiences are caring about our forests. Obi is the best-selling author and illustrator of many best-selling books, including the California Field Atlas, and most recently, The Forests of California, a comprehensive work that blends science and art to illuminate the unique character of California's vast and threatened arboreal world. Through the literary invention of the Field Atlas, it's Obi's work to popularize the concept of geographic literacy as a collective tool instrumental in understanding the complex conservation challenges and opportunities of this century. In autumn 2020, while working on the Field Atlases to come, Obi's embarking on a virtual book tour to support the Forests of California. He calls it Stubborn Optimism, Catastrophic Success, in which he presents a call to action of how, with a unified vision of radical hope, we steward California's natural world through the transformative ecological bottleneck for the long-term benefit of every being who calls this place home. Obi, welcome, and thanks for being part of this today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak about Walker Ridge, a place I love so much, and to be once again aligned with the California Native Plant Society.
Thanks, Obi. And Nick, let's see, do I see you, Nick? There you are, great. Nick is our lead conservation scientist here at CNPS, and Nick oversees the day-to-day operations of our conservation program up and down the state. Nick received his PhD in botany from Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Gardens / Claremont Graduate University, where he studied the flora of Tejon Ranch and evolutionary patterns in jewel flowers, otherwise known as Streptanthus. He has also worked as a botanist ecologist for Chicago Botanic Garden, UC Davis, the U.S. Forest Service, and as a private consultant. Hey, Nick, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. It's a wonderful place, and I hope this will be a really wonderful afternoon for all the participants and the observers of today's presentation.
Wonderful. So we're going to dive into our moderated questions now, and I want to invite the audience to go ahead and submit your questions using our Q&A function. We're not going to be able to answer all the questions, but we'll do our best. We have Sarah from our team and Elizabeth from our team who will be answering some questions in the background through the Q&A, and we'll be choosing a few of our favorite questions for the end of the webinar if we have time to have Obi and Nick address them. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in so we can cover as much ground as possible. So to kick things off, Obi and Nick, let's talk about first impressions. Do you remember the first time you saw Walker Ridge? What struck you most, and what did you notice that was immediately or even instinctually different than other places? And Obi, let's have you answer that question first.
Well, I've been coming to what would eventually become in 2015 Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument my whole life. I grew up on Mount Diablo and was fortunate enough as a child to have so many camping opportunities around Berryessa and down in Cache Creek. And I was 13 or so the first time I camped up at Walker Ridge down at Blue Oaks Campground, a primitive campsite that's still there. And it was, I remember it distinctly because it was the first time I ever saw a golden eagle. It was the biggest bird I had ever seen yet. And I remember distinctly as even then being a painter, that in the early morning light, when it came low over my head, how it glowed this lilac color against the dawn light, a trick really of the vernal sky. Even back then I was really, I was really into wildflower hunting. I think that's always been a place where I don't know if it's something that I think hunters have this satisfaction of finding it, and it's a practice really of engagement with nature. And for me, wildflower hunting has always been it. And I'm pretty sure that when I was 13, I found the rare Indian Valley Brodea, which lives on Walker Ridge, and one of the special plant species of note that we'll be talking about today. But Walker Ridge, you stand there, and the vastness of the view shed of the ridge itself reminds me of Diablo, the coastal ranges that I was most familiar with at that time. You look to the west and you got mysterious Mount Canocti over there, rising rather like Tamalpais from the view of my childhood from Diablo, like this whale back break, as if the old volcano was reaching up out of Clear Lake. But then you turn around to Bear Valley and Mill Creek, which is Mill Creek and Bear Creek watersheds, and the chamois covered ridges going forward eventually to the Sacramento Valley, like this big empty geologists call them cordilleras, right? Big, satisfying, undisrupted, peopleless space, really.
Wow. Yeah, very evocative. Nick, how about you?
So, God, I wish I had been able to go up to Walker Ridge when I was 13. For me, it happened a little bit later in life. For me, the beauty and really the specialness of this place has always been in some way linked to threats to it from proposed wind development. And the first time I actually went up there was when I was an employee of CNPS back in 2009. And it was with our then conservation director, Greg Suba. And this was leading up to CNPS's second proposal to have have Walker Ridge designated as an area of critical environmental concern by the Bureau of Land Management. And we went up there to basically to familiarize ourselves with the place. I think as a conservation advocate, I think it's really important to go and see the places that we're fighting to protect. And so I remember that day pretty vividly. It's been more than 10 years, and I guess that's the way the place is. It kind of seeps into your soul a little bit. And I remember remarking on how varied and diverse it actually is. There's a whole variety of habitats, and that is really when we study the place, we learn that it is home to a remarkable number of rare plants. Botanists have documented 27 rare species on this location. And that's something that is, when you're there, you're like, well, that makes sense because it is a very varied place. And so drawing upon my experience as a conservation advocate and a botanist, and I can't really think of very many places in this state that have that many rare species in such a kind of relatively small area. Of course, I also, you know, I've long been a lover of our serpentine habitats, and I'll talk about, if I get to it, I'll talk a little bit more about those in detail later on. But these are incredibly harsh places where a lot of special plants live. It's hard to make a living in such adverse conditions, and so I guess it's in a lot of ways for me, as somebody who studies diversity in California, it's really a quintessential place.
Thanks, Nick. And for people who don't know, do you want to just clarify what you mean by serpentine habitat? Can you explain that?
Sure. Yeah. So serpentine habitats are state rock, serpentinite, and some associated types of rocks. They weather into this very kind of what is a somewhat harsh soil type that has an abundance of certain minerals and a lack of others, which makes it a tough place for plants to live. And so you have very interesting habitats and very interesting species in those types of habitats.
Thanks.
All right, so I want to ask about one of my favorite topics, which is color. And Obi, you have a sumptuous palette. And when I look at the colors and the tones coming out of these paintings from Walker Ridge, there is this very specific and unique language and aesthetic coming out of there. Mm. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you go about choosing this color palette and using that to reflect and express what you're seeing on the ground, so to speak, in Walker Ridge.
Yeah, I am. Well, I've got a couple of different answers to this question, and it's true that well, the first answer, of course, would be colors as far as they represent or work to inform my style of naturalized rendering, how nature appears through my lenses and the atmosphere. Of course, I am also a cartographer. I mean, I am an artist, but I write big sprawling books on nature and have a lot of opinions about the dissemination of data-driven information in graphic systems. So my books are full of hand-painted maps too. So every color transmits a bit of information, whether we're talking about within the picture plane of one of these renderings I spoke about, or we're talking about color within a map. So color directs attention, and its formal application is an essential factor in relaying meaning. Okay, so that's where I'm getting at here. Like if, for example, you, as was done recently with that plan for development for this wind farm that's going in on Walker Ridge, you'll see that most of the area within the development site is painted this light color, this tan color that, according to the key, marks blue oak, foothill pine, and mixed chaparral vegetative species, habitat types. And then another key makes for the notes for the special status species and vegetation types that are in the larger project area around Walker Ridge. And so what's the story being told in the use of those really sort of light colors where you see the darker, more distinct colors off to the side, indicating endangered habitat or some sort of species or plant that may or may not be present. And I think that there are two stories being told. One is through the use of color. The vegetation within the project area is lightly contrasting, almost symbolizing a banal, non-essential quality, if you will. And the other projects are like, what if the chaparral was painted in a high contrast red? I mean to say, like, what we're assigning value, if you will, by use of the color. So in all of my map making, in all of my painting as an artist, as a communicator of information, which is hopefully the nature of my vocation at all, there is a power in how we present data, and color choice, of course, directly corresponds to that. I mean, the way that the human mind responds to these formal qualities within the picture plane is a particular, we respond in a very particular way, and maps and color and data can be manipulated to tell a story. And we must be ever vigilant of that when we're consuming really any piece of information, especially when we're talking about the rareness and preciousness of a place. So I realize I gave you a sort of tangential answer to a question that might have been a little bit more straightforward to a painter. It's like, why do you choose the colors you choose? Well, you know, I'm also a cartographer and very sensitive to the way that humans consume information, and really want to let the audience decide for themselves by getting out of the way of that power that I'm describing at all.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Nick, from a scientific perspective, what's going on in terms of, you know, the colors that we're seeing at Walker Ridge? Is there kind of an underlying biology or kind of rationale, I guess, if you were to use that word, for the colors that we're observing out in Walker Ridge?
Sure. Okay, so I'll approach this two different ways. I'll approach it zooming in, and then we'll zoom out and look at it, the landscape as a whole. To me, you know, one of the easiest example how colors that you view in a landscape is related to biology, is the well-known relationship between plants and pollinators. Now, and I'll be careful to say, there aren't very strict rules in nature. Was one of the sayings that says nature doesn't build in straight lines. But there are some trends in what we would call this coevolutionary relationship between plants and insects, or plants and other pollinators like hummingbirds. And in the case of hummingbirds, when you see a red-colored inflorescence, often with plants that have tubular flowers, like for instance, some castellias or Indian paintbrushes that are red have a nice long floral tube. Or another classic example would be our California fuchsia, the genus Epilobium canum, if you're a botanist and know the scientific names. These are the product of a coevolutionary dance between hummingbirds and plants. And it turns out, although we can't really ask them, we can observe them, that hummingbirds really like red tubular flowers. Okay, that's one example. So it can be at that scale of looking at an individual flower that you can be understanding color. But what about if you zoom out and you look at the landscape as a whole, the vegetation types, the patterns of chaparral? You might see that a lot of times you'll see, like Obi talked about this a little bit too, with the blue oak, or blue oak having its own special cast of color, or for instance, many of our chaparral shrubs. It's like I mentioned, it can be very hot there. It's a very tough environment for many plants to live. And some of these plants will have dense layers of leaves on hairs on their leaves. And you know, this is what a color that would, you know, kind of paints the landscape with a more muted tones, not these verdant greens that you would see in a tropical landscape. And these are plants adapting to their environment, in that they use this dense layer of hairs on their leaves in order to kind of protect themselves from damage from UV. It's kind of like plant sunscreen. And so color is incredibly important for plants and I think it's from a very functional perspective, whether it be doing your bidding as far as making sure that your pollen is passed from one plant to another, or whether it's responding to the environment itself.
Beautiful, thank you.
Very cool. So when we're talking about the living world, you know, there's often some sense of urgency, you know, some moment in our experience that's here now, but may not be 5 minutes from now, or maybe 50 years from now. And so, Nick, can you first talk about the urgency you feel when you see Walker Ridge?
Sure, yeah. Well, you know, something that's been on a lot of people's mind these days with the wildfires that we've been witnessing is climate change. So of course, climate change is a factor that's fueling some of the wildfires that we're seeing today in California. But if we think about it from the plant's perspective, plants live in a given area because of, well, a variety of factors, but one of them is their environmental tolerance. And we think that, and we think of that as, temperature, precipitation. And we know that as our climate changes, largely as our climate is getting warmer, that plants might have to change where they live in order to satisfy their environmental tolerance, and they're going to have to move. So in some cases, a plant may be able to stay and adapt, use its own flexibility to stay on Walker Ridge, but some plants may need to move. So in some level, really what we're viewing on Walker Ridge as far as our assemblages of plants may not be the same assemblage of plants that we view 100 years from now. And to me, that's a little bit sad. But to add a sense of urgency, that means that we need to give our plants and our animals a chance to migrate. And that means that conserving large swaths of land, like we have on Walker Ridge and adjacent areas at Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument, need to be conserved and be kept intact so that plants and animals have a chance to survive. I will just maybe touch on it a little bit because I think it is. It's the bit of the elephant in the room here is wind development, which is a really tough issue for us because Walker Ridge has been the site of 4 proposed wind developments, and that is to say that I think it's not the best place for wind energy development in the first place. It's pretty low wind potential as far as generating, the amount of energy that's necessary for commercial wind. And I think that we are at this point in our society where there are these kind of what we might call some false choices, in that we are sometimes being asked to choose between the conservation of rare species in special places and the production of renewable energy. And I would say that I'll leave it at that, and that I hope we don't really, in society, that we can make the changes necessary, and that we don't ever have to make that choice between 27 rare species, rare plant species, and the quest for cleaner energy.
Hey, Nick, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is there any examples that you know of serpentine endemic flora actually moving latitudinally north yet?
I have not read anything about this as of late, but it's a hard thing to think about for serpentine plants, because they often live in these kind of circumscribed areas, and you think they're going to have to make, and I would think they'd have to make these big leaps, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen that often. But then again, we know plants move around a lot, and so over long periods of time, these kind of what would seem impossible distributional shifts happen. And so nature is resilient. I have faith in nature. So I think that if it isn't happening, it probably will, and thank goodness that it will. If these otherwise, but at the same time, I think many of these serpentine endemic plants, or plants that are only growing on serpentine, they're pretty darn tough. They may be able to stick it out there even with a couple degrees of Celsius of change.
Depending on so many other stressors. I love this question.
I know.
I love this question about.
Yeah, Obi, talk to us about the ephemeral in this landscape.
I think I'm gonna approach it a little bit philosophically.
Yeah.
I'm sort of enjoying giving perhaps non sequitur answers here. I think that when you're discussing, the temporal organization of any living system, it seems like it should be a regular, even obvious way of defining that system. But in the realm of ecology, it rarely is. There's this sense that nature goes on, that although individuals die and species even go extinct, the habitat goes on. It evolves. When in fact, though, all living aspects of nature, including the habitats themselves, have a birth date and a death date, arguably. But this liminal space, this transitional space that bookends what could be called like a time shed, where you have a watershed, or you have a view shed of a mountain. A time shed would would be between 2 points of existence, right? Between being there and not being there. And there's lots of abiotic factors to consider there. It's very hard to pinpoint from any practical human perspective. I think like a blue oak, we were talking about blue oaks. Let's keep talking about blue oaks. They spend the first several hundred years of their life growing and living, and then spend the next several hundred years of dying, right? After they're dead, they still contribute to the system. I mean, that is to say that the slow decay of a dead tree and its incorporation and use really by the thousands and thousands of creatures that benefit from the slow spend of that physical chemical nutrient reservoir that is the tree body. It makes death really an uncertain metric from an ecological perspective. And so the larger point I'm trying to make is that there's nothing discrete in ecology, right? Each system ebbs and flows over the next. I mean, just to bring in that strange project report, which is why this issue of Walker Ridge is like on the forefront of so many trajectories really in conservation philosophy as we approach the middle of the 21st century. Like, what is actually being environmentally responsible? When in fact it seems like this effort presented in this project is sort of continues this sort of, I don't know, it's just an effort for legal compliance towards, but still perpetuates this commodification of nature. As if like it's meant to protect the species from a business point of view and not an ecological point of view. I mean, the maps that they present are, and this is going back to my answer to my last question, I suppose, is that what information does a map give? When I see their maps as sort of like recipes for area-wide destruction. I mean, it doesn't tell the story of connectivity of these complex systems, these circulations needed to sustain that resiliency that Nick was talking about across the eco network, really. I mean, it's a story, the story presented is of simplification and fragmentation, really, which are, you know, I mean, this whole project is only a few feet from the National Monument border, you know, and so there's this fallacious claim of stewardship here. I mean, it's within the border, it's within the viewshed of the monument. It's going to dominate the landscape on many different levels. I mean, I want there to be eagles in the monument. This project threatens that. I want there to be endangered flowers in this watershed. This project threatens that. I want there that, you know, the salamanders I found in Indian Valley in my youth, I want them to be there, and this project threatens that. I mean, the desire I speak of when I say I want, it's not, I hope and trust that it's not born out of some selfish thing.
Well, I think it's the personal connection.
It's the personal connection, that's right. Because we know that biodiversity is how ecosystems sustain their resiliency. We know that much. And this project threatens that.
So Obi, I feel like, thank you. And I feel like you started to answer this next question that I want to ask. You know, Georgia O'Keeffe was famous for saying that, you know, she wanted these rushed city people to see a flower, whether they wanted to see it or not. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I look at your artwork of Walker Ridge.
Oh, yeah, I've been a fan of O'Keeffe. She informed me as a young painter through and through. One of my deep inspirations, really. But I think the flower. Okay, so right. What was the?
So what do you want people to see with Walker Ridge?
Right, because she wanted them.
Yeah.
Do you remember the quote? It was like she wanted the city people to see a flower, whether they wanted to or not.
See it or not.
There was sort of like this get in your face. There was almost like an air of activism in what she was talking about. But I think that she was talking in her taciturn way of being. I mean, what she was actually insisting people pay attention to was not so much the natural beauty. Well, let's put it this way. I think it was the value of natural beauty that the symbol of the flower manifested through the artist's media represented. So what I would hope people see in Walker Ridge is the same thing I wish them to see in all rare, precious moments across the natural geography of California's rich country, right? With endemic properties that provide material and aesthetic abundance should we show up to our responsibilities towards stewardship. I mean, the intrinsic value of O'Keeffe's flower transcends money. It transcends utilitarian worth, and our world has little in the way of the ability to account for that. I mean, we see in the report on that proposed project, it doesn't even attempt to value the quasi-measurable services of that the ecosystem of Walker Ridge provides. I mean, what are we talking about? We're talking about genetic resources of rare species of plants and animals with a habitat refugia that the government has already labeled as an area of critical environmental concern. I mean, going forward into, as I say, into the middle of the 21st century, preserving our critically endangered habitat spaces, I mean, allows, even if they allow for a modicum of corridor-based viable environments and ecologies, moves into the realm of pricelessness. And this is the kind of thinking that is slowly, perhaps quickly, transforming across our society as we are reckoning with a policy towards our natural landscapes that is based in, as I said, commodification of those landscapes. So I think it's a rather long-winded analysis of O'Keeffe's quip, but I think that she was pointing at something deep and true and meaningful.
Thanks, Obi. And Nick, for you, Obi touched on some things that I'm sure you would want to emphasize too. And so thanks for that, Obi. Nick, what is there anything in particular that you want to make sure people see or know about this place?
Well, so in my the first answer that I gave to one of the questions, I talked a little bit about serpentine habitat, and that's by no means like the only thing that's of value on Walker Ridge, because there's a plethora of habitats that are worthy of our concern and our conservation efforts. But maybe I'll just expand a little bit on serpentine habitats. And just to go back a little bit, these are these habitats that are as the result of the weathering of our state rock serpentinite. And these are habitats that are, high in iron, magnesium, nickel, and some heavy metals, low in calcium and some other things that are really good so those first 3 or 4 things that I said, in excess, not so good for plants. And then they're low on some of the things that are really good for plants, like calcium, which plants need to build cell walls and perform other functions. But what I'd like to talk about is, so you have this very, in some places on Walker Ridge, very inhospitable territory for plants. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about why those places function as places where there's a tremendous amount of diversity and of special plants. And really what happens in these serpentine areas is that they function a little bit like islands. So these patches of serpentine, they're surrounded, which are kind of these tough environments, are surrounded by what is comparatively very fertile ground. And so over time, certain plants have been able to colonize these tough habitats. And over millennia, over many thousands and thousands of years, some of these colonizers have become different from the plants in which they came from their sister species, and have become indeed their own species. And now many of these plants, which we now call serpentine endemics, or plants that occur nowhere else in no other habitat, are rare, and they only find their purchase in these places like Walker Ridge. So when we talk about these rare plants, this diversity of species that we are fighting to save, we are often talking about that suite of serpentine endemics. And I think that it's a habitat that's a bit harsh, like I've said. I've said it probably too many times. But it's a place that that I think that people don't necessarily love as much as they should. We think of California, we think of our oak woodlands, and we think of our redwood forests, and maybe some of the scenic Sierran landscapes up in the high country. But I think once you learn about some of these, like these really cool evolutionary stories, these really cool stories about how these rare plants have found a way to live in an inhospitable habitat, I think it makes it more approachable to us and should make it less able for us to threaten and destroy these places. There's a lot of stories that I would say a place like Walker Ridge has to tell.
Well, isn't that the perfect segue into what I know David wants to ask you guys? Thank you, Nick. That was really cool.
I get all the juicy topics. So. And what I mean by secrets here is, there are many paintings left to be painted. There are many scientific discoveries yet to be made at Walker Ridge. And I wanted to ask you first, Obi, what are some things that are out there, some beautiful visuals? I mean, your whole lifetime at Walker Ridge and various memories, what are some things that still need to be painted and need to be seen that you want people to know about?
Well, there's two ways of going about this. Right now, in the area surrounding Walker Ridge and Indian Valley, and then, of course, to the south, a lot of these landscapes don't look right now as I have portrayed them. I don't think that we can get out of this discussion here today if we don't talk about fire. This section of the monument, really, that wasn't toasted in the 2018's ranch fire, was handled this year by the LNU Lightning Complex. That's still not, as we're talking today, 100% contained. And this landscape is meant to burn with a regularized, normalized regime. Chamise is a little bit controversial. The chaparral burns at a longer interval between fire events than say oak woodland would. But fire here, man, this landscape is vulnerable to it. It's that perfect storm combination of fuel, weather, and topography that burns again and again. Fire takes advantage of these steep sloped ridges to preheat up these fuel loads upslope from the burn that it's working on below, and simultaneously then uses these convection columns of hot gas to funnel through drainages and spread quickly and with tremendous severity. Severity being something very different than intensity. Native grasses can do the high intensity, low severity burns that come with a regularized fire regime of 5 to 20 years. We just can't deal with these mega fires, and this ecosystem can't deal with these mega fires with this return in interval index that's getting smaller and smaller year by year. But it's just very important to address that today as we're talking about the unseen secrets and threats of Walker Ridge. But I think to now completely turn, if I may, my answer to this question to another way of looking at the landscape, which is something that I do in my own practice on a regular basis, is an exercise in ecology where you scratch a circle in the ground, and you can make it about 3 feet wide. Some people make it smaller. I mean, I have arguably scratched a circle around all of California, and I'm doing it over what will ultimately be 6 long books about California nature. But if we were to do that, say, like in Walker Ridge's area of critical environmental concern, and watch it through the year, just watch the ground for the year. Maybe we're up on one of Nick's little serpentine patches there. You would see a whole otherwise unseen landscape, right? It would reveal itself to you, I mean to say, as it quote unquote moves through the circle in this phenology, right? This seasonal behavior that expresses and manifests. I mean, you might see these rare wildflowers blooming in February, and then later you might see a bear print indicating larger patterns of mammal movements across this what might be a wildlife corridor, suggesting larger implications to the ecosystem itself, revealing deeper secrets. I mean, you might find an owl pellet in the summertime that would suggest patterns of predation and other trophic interactions, if you will. But those are only the biotic interactions. I mean, we have climate trends, fire patterns, lithospheric evidence that would also be revealed. I mean, the point of the exercise, of course, is to ultimately offer a focus of study, like a keyhole to unlock a door into a larger world. I would love to see environmental reports that actually do that. Let's talk about the whole phenology, the whole arc of the year. What uses this place from month to month? We have to have a full picture of that. And why can we not do that? We have we have the story to tell, that's for sure. Anyway, I yield my time.
That's beautiful, Obi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much.
Thank you.
All right, Nick, to you. I mean, you can see too how both of your perspectives and thoughts overlap. I mean, there's not a dichotomy between art and science, and it blurs in beautiful ways. Nick, can you talk about the ecological secrets that there might be hidden, or the botanical secrets that might be hidden at Walker Ridge that need to be uncovered?
Well, yeah. I mean, there are certainly. I mean, California is replete with stories of people finding new species or new populations of things that are plant species and animal species, where people have been going for years. There's been a very charismatic lily discovered in Yosemite next to a major highway, that kind of thing. But I wanted to kind of to think about this from a different perspective, about what you might not be seeing when you're looking at one of Obi's beautiful paintings or one of the photos that we have put up, and that I kind of think of the natural world as a feast for the senses. I mean, if you've ever been in the field with a botanist, which I do recommend if you haven't, we're pretty good company in the field. You'll notice that we kind of are constantly picking little pieces of leaves and smelling them, trying to get little clues as to what they might be, trying to jar a memory. Observing and understanding the natural world is not about just seeing. For me, the habitats like we see on Walker Ridge, chaparral and woodland, grassland, forelands, whatever it may be, a lot of them are associated with senses to me that are other than seeing. I remember when I fell in love with the flora of California, becoming, entranced by the smell of ceanothus, one of our famous native shrub genera, ceanothus blossoms, or of cypress, McNabb cypress, which has an amazing smell, or of yerba santa. Now, if I smell those plants, I mean, if I smell a plant that's even just growing in a garden, not in the habitat that it's actually, from in nature, it can transport me back to places like Walker Ridge. I think that learning about habitats like Walker Ridge really is a process. It's not, you're never learned in the landscape of California. It's like, peeling off the layers of an ever-expanding onion. Once you learn to identify a plant, you've just learned its name. You can talk to your friends about it, but you don't really know it. Knowing something is a lifelong process. And to know a complex habitat like Walker Ridge would be a lifetime in and of itself. So I just think that it's, we botanists maybe place too much emphasis on names, and rather than, thinking that we know something just because we can, call out its scientific name, but knowing is something that is way more deep.
That's really cool, Nick.
That is cool.
Thanks.
It's a good place to start, though, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that
well, you kind of have to start somewhere.
Yeah, the scientific name it's not like we're calling just flowers Fred, Roger, and Nancy. I mean, these names mean something. They're taxonomic information that holds vast books of relations, really.
Well, and we get to know the names of the friends we love too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
I
love that story, Nick, of the lily by the road in Yosemite. We'll have to talk about that some other day. That kind of thought drives me crazy.
We could have a whole webinar on unlikely discoveries. Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, my last question for you guys. And I don't want to rush you guys through this one because I think it's a really important one for the audience, but I do want to see, let's try to compress it some so we can have a little bit of time for audience questions at the end. But, so part of the reason we wanted to feature the two of you together on this is that you're both really powerful advocates for the natural world, especially here in California. But in different ways. You guys have different skills that overlap, but in some ways are very different, and different talent. That shows all of us something important, and that is that each of us can be contributing to conservation and can be building a connection with the natural world in our own unique ways. And so I'm just wondering if you guys can offer up any insights or suggestions you might have for others on how people can deepen their own relationships with nature and help advocate for the places they love, like Walker Ridge. And so, Nick, let's start with you, and then let's close with Obi.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll try not to speak in cliches here or anything, but I'll reflect on kind of my past a few years as a conservation advocate. And when I think about the projects that I've worked on, it really is those projects that have strong support of lots of people that are the most successful. And I can draw upon one of my favorite victories so far, doing this for as a professional, which is a project outside of Joshua Tree, the proposal to build a whole new city on the south side of the Joshua Tree National Park, and there was a project called Paradise Valley in a place called Shavers Valley, and it was really the combination of kind of the professional environmental advocates and the local people coming together to raise alarm about this place that caused us to have a win on that one. So I would say if we're going to save a place like Walker Ridge, it isn't probably going to be done by somebody like me, with my degree and my job title, writing a comment letter. It will be because thousands of people spoke out, because those people signed a petition that said, we think that there's a better use to this place, or people went to a public meeting and got to know their elected representatives and told them that this is important to us. So I think that sometimes people get frustrated and they think that, hey, what can I do as just one person? And like, what are the actions of a single individual going to do? But the reality is that in aggregate, it's a lot. And when we come together to save, a place like this, like Walker Ridge, it's really giving the landscape a voice for itself. It can't speak for itself. Maybe it speaks to you when you're there, but the same message it's giving you is fall on the ears of somebody who's making a decision, whether or not it is developed or not. And so, I think I have to believe, I have to have a lot of positivity in my day-to-day work, because some of these battles can be really tough, but I have to believe that we can affect change, and save this place. So, we never really should underestimate what we can do in mass. We need to preserve the ability for folks to get sunburned up there on Walker Ridge when they're studying serpentine wildflowers. That's really important to me. And, you know, I think that, you know, we still have a lot to learn from a place like that.
Thanks, Nick. Obi?
Oh, thank you, Nick. That was very insightful. I think that you made a good point for almost an activist mindset of ways to become engaged in a community going out. I think that I will then take the opportunity to go inward a little bit and really acknowledge this moment as we speak, September 17th, 2020. I mean, these are days of potentially massive trauma, really, across the whole state, as we are all thinking of from racial justice to climate breakdown, this landscape-wide conflagration, international pandemic. I mean, it's an unprecedented moment of stress. I mean, we're talking about a place, Walker Ridge, that will burn. Not if it's going to burn, it will burn at some point. What is our responsibility then to it? So, on a personal level, on a personal note, I encourage leaning in, getting strong, but above all, staying calm. And I think this is done by learning the systems of nature that feed all life. And that opens up a road, really, so that we work on not being brittle in our ideology. I think that we all have a strength, a muscle, really, a capacity to understand and internalize new data as it comes at us, to change our minds. And the opportunity before us all in this year is, and over the next several decades, really, as we enter this age of reckoning, this bottleneck that we've already, by our own momentum, entered into, we can channel this energy then to, like the forest around us, like these burnt landscapes, transform and reset with them. Walker Ridge represents a unique moment in California geography, really, where we find our humanity as defined. Well, we find our humanity as defined by the balance of our responsibilities in our stewardship with our rights in our society. Today's divisive rhetoric will blow away like the smoke in the wind as the information wars that we so often encounter in popular culture fade behind the larger and better story unfolding that we're beginning to tell here today of an informed citizenry, a society really that will inform the next 100 years, as different 100 years from now as it was 100 years ago. I guess the passing words of wisdom I would like to end on would be, of course, that today's catastrophes clothed tomorrow's children in wisdom. And going forward with the wisest choice, deliberating that is the best and will always be the best course. So I'll get down off my soapbox then.
Obi.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. This has been a lot of fun. I understand now that was your last question. Is that right, Leaf?
That was, and
okay.
I see we have quite a few questions in the Q&A, and I believe Elizabeth and Sarah have surfaced some of their favorites to David.
Yes. So
all right.
We have a question. Other proposals to place wind turbines on Walker Ridge have failed. Are there new reasons why this current proposal may have greater traction?
Good question. I don't think so. And, you know, the unfortunate thing is we don't necessarily always know why proposals stall out or never come to fruition. And we're certainly glad that past ones have not either. We do know that when you look at kind of the wind energy potential on the site, it's not that great. It's not great compared to other commercial scale wind energy projects or wind energy sites in California. And that could play a role, which to me, like, even just makes it more, like, the case even stronger for why do we keep on going down this path, you know, where, you know, there's a proposal and then the environmental community gets together and we get really, you know, we get scared and worried. And then for some reason or another, the project goes away. It's not economically viable, whatever it might be. And then only to fight a similar battle a couple of years later when the next, you know, the next company comes up and you know, purchases it from the last one and proposes it again. And I think what we really can do at this point in time is ask our own federal government, who represents us, to put a final no on this process. Just say, and it's not really a no in the negative sense, but it's a yes to something else. It's a yes to continued recreational opportunities. It's a yes to giving those plants and animals that live on Walker Ridge and the golden eagles that fly over it a chance to be there for the next several hundred years, the next 1,000 years. And so it's really more of a yes than a no, I would say, when we're kind of challenging this assumption that this is even a good idea in the first place.
Thanks, Nick. I want to ask you a question, Obi. What does painting Walker Ridge give us that photography can't?
I'm going after a different understanding, aren't I? I'm going after something in myself, as I was alluding to there in my closing statement. I am sure that by turning the key inside of me, I have faith in that the whole world turns. So I remember being a young man exploring the Chumash rock art of the Santa Ynez Mountains above Santa Barbara. I went to college, and you know, the 500-year-old paintings of representing things that I didn't really understand, and in fact, a lot of that narrative is lost. But what I did understand was I was looking at an artist who was communicating with their society about their own engagement into the natural world and presenting truths that were there found. So I believe that this whole unity of knowledge, really, between the humanities and the sciences presents a very powerful story. In fact, the most powerful version of story, and we'll use a capital S to describe a whole technology of interhuman communication about the more than human world, which is, so if it comes down to some sort of medium, I don't think that it makes a particular difference. In fact, I know writers who can do it. I mean, come on, it happens in theater. The humanities is able to communicate these deep truths about how we are not apart from nature, but in fact a mirror for itself, as if we are this self-awareness, this cognitive gift that we have is not unique. And as science shows us, all life on this planet is one, and that is probably the truest and most important fact that we can that we can discuss about future engagement in the natural world.
Thanks, Obi.
Thank you.
Leave, I want to throw it back to you. How can our listeners and individuals take action, today for Walker Ridge?
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today. We have a petition that the coalition has put together. We're asking the BLM to permanently protect Walker Ridge as an area of critical environmental concern. You can link to it if you go to cnps.org/protect Walker Ridge. We have a lot of other information there on the landing page if you want to learn more about the campaign and the issue at hand. So please feel free to visit that, and you can link to the petition from there. And thanks for caring and for being curious. So I think that wraps up our webinar for today. I want to thank Obi and Nick for joining us for such a really meaningful and thoughtful conversation, you guys. It was really wonderful and hopefully a bit of a balm for everyone. I know it was for me. So thanks so much. And we look forward to more great conversations, and we'll keep everyone posted, of course, on what happens with Walker Ridge. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye.